The fastest way to grow on Spotify is through its algorithmically generated playlists, specifically the top three, which are Radio, Release Radar, and Discover Weekly. I mean, if you take a look at my data on Spotify as an artist over the lifetime of me releasing music, you can see this is the case. At the very top of the list for me is Discover Weekly, second is Radio, and number 3 is Release Radar. Now, technically speaking, Spotify has more than just these 3 algorithmically generated playlists, but in my experience, both as an artist and looking inside of the Spotify for Artists accounts of all of the artists that we've managed with my agency, DuPree X, all of the other ones kind of come downstream of these top 3. Now, because these 3 playlists are so powerful, let's take a look at each of them and talk about what makes them tick, as well as cover what we might be able to do to maximize our chances of getting on each one. Now, first up is Spotify's Radio playlist. Of these 3 playlists, Radio is generally the easiest nut to crack for most artists. It's the lowest barrier to entry, and even if you have just a handful of average monthly listeners and a handful of streams, theoretically, it's possible you might see some streams from Spotify's Radio playlist. Every artist by default ends up with an artist radio playlist on their profile now. So if somebody goes to your profile and then visits that radio playlist, technically those will come from Spotify's algorithmically generated radio playlist. But that's not really where the power lies. The power lies in getting on the radio rotation of other artists and songs that you want to be affiliated with. Radio is basically an infinite serving of new music. It's an infinite playlist on infinite loop. Sometimes it repeats. Oftentimes it's just serving up new music. So the way it works is Spotify relies very, very heavily on understanding who your music is for, what other listeners are listening to your music so that they can put your music in front of similar listeners like that. So for example, if you make lo-fi music, ideally speaking, your music is going to end up in the radio playlists of other artists who make lo-fi as well, and then their music will end up on your artist radio playlist, and you will mix and match, assuming Spotify understands what your music is about and who's listening to it. Now, the best way to make this happen is to ensure that Spotify understands your music and understands who you're looking for. The 2 best ways to do this are to send traffic via organic content and via ads to either your artist profile or directly to your song, or my favorite method, your own artist playlist with your music, as well as music from other artists who you want to access their fans. Sending traffic from an ad to a playlist of music that is all very similar by similar artists that includes most of your music and others is a great way to educate Spotify's algorithm on who it should be looking for to serve your music up to via other radio playlists. Now, the second playlist is Release Radar. I think of Release Radar as kind of like a springboard to unlocking a ton of other stuff on Spotify, specifically Discover Weekly, which we'll get to in just a minute. Release Radar works like this. When you have followers on Spotify, every time you release new music, assuming you pitch your music 7 days in advance at least to Spotify's editorial team, or otherwise the algorithm, let's just be honest, nobody's reading these, Spotify will put your music on the Release Radar playlist of the people who currently follow you, which is great. But most of them are not going to listen to your song within the first week on their Release Radar playlist because not everybody listens to new music on Release Radar. Realistically speaking, in my experience, if you're seeing like 5% or more of your followers listening to your new music on Release Radar, you're winning. So we're not going to rely entirely on your followers getting your music heard within the first 7 days of release. Instead, what we want to do is we want to send a ton of traffic specifically to that song on Spotify to try to get the requisite number of streams, which is around 2,400, and the requisite popularity score, which is around 20%, to get a Release Radar push. And what happens there is if you get enough traffic to the song within 7 days, you can get Spotify to then add that song to the Release Radar playlists of people who don't yet follow you. And if your genre association is correct, it will end up in front of listeners who will probably end up liking you and potentially listening to more of your music and maybe even following you on the platform too. Now, if you can get people to follow you from Release Radar, this really cool kind of built-in feedback loop happens where you were discovered on Release Radar, which means the person who discovered you has shown a propensity for consuming music on Release Radar in the past. They follow you, so when they get your new song because they're a follower on day 1 on their Release Radar playlist from now on, they are more likely to listen to it next time. So the more Release Radar listeners you can get, or fans of Release Radar in general you can get in your followers, the more of them potentially will listen to your music on day one, and you won't have to spend as much money over time or post as much or send as much traffic to the song over time, because you'll have that built-in attention on the platform of diehards who are already consuming music via Release Radar in the first place. And then the third and my personal favorite playlist is Discover Weekly. I am of the mind that Discover Weekly is the most powerful playlist on Spotify. In fact, I've done videos about this in the past. I'll leave a link to one in the description of this one if you want to go check that out. Discover Weekly is the great unlock for a lot of artists. I would say for most artists, if you can get on it, but it is more difficult to get on it. It takes about 9,000 streams, a little over that, within the first 28 days. Of course, if you can do it in a tighter amount of time, the bigger your boost will be, kind of like with Release Radar. Technically speaking, back to Release Radar, it's 2,400 streams in 28 days, but if you can do it in 7, you get more of a push. Anyway, back to Discover Weekly. It's about 9,000 streams. You want to get to a popularity score of 30. It starts to test at about 25%. And by the way, if you don't know what popularity score is, we've built this really cool tool. If you want to go check that out, I'll leave a link in the description of the video if you want to go use the Artist X-Ray. It's a little tool we built to check your popularity scores on Spotify. I think it's pretty neat. Anyway, so if you can get to a popularity score of 25 to 30% and get 9,000 streams within the first 28 days, you will potentially end up with a Discover Weekly spike. Now, where Release Radar is updated every Friday, Discover Weekly is actually updated every Monday, which means if you're going to get a boost on Discover Weekly, you're going to see a spike in your listeners, your streams, hopefully saves, all the metrics on Monday once your data inside of Spotify for artists refreshes on Tuesday. Now, if you can get a song to kind of go off on Discover Weekly, what's likely to happen is you'll get a big spike and it'll trail off. And then the following Monday, you probably won't see anything, especially if you're at the lower level of getting onto that playlist at, like 30% or so. Now, the reason this happens is because when you get a ton of new listeners, the save rate kind of tanks. And so Spotify goes, well, not as many people are saving this as a percentage of the people who are listening to it. So it's underperforming. So we're not going to push it again. That's kind of how the math works out. But what will generally happen is as long as the song stays up, you'll see that spike Monday, the next Monday, nothing. And then the next Monday, probably another one. And it's kind of this sawtooth every other Monday thing that will happen to a song that stays within the parameters required to get on Discover Weekly. Which means if you can get more than one song hitting Discover Weekly every other week, if you get 2 songs and they're off of each other, you should be theoretically getting a spike every week, every Monday from Discover Weekly. And it's kind of like a surfer riding a wave. They catch a wave, ride in, swim back out the following Monday, catch a wave, ride in, over and over and over and over again. Now, for some concrete context about how this works, my 2 most popular songs on Spotify are a song called Hero and a song called Lions. Now, combined, these 2 songs have contributed over 1.2 million streams from my catalog personally as an artist. And if you look at my algorithmic playlist breakdown, specifically Discover Weekly, you can see that over 350,000 of those streams have come from Discover Weekly for those 2 songs, which is about 28% of the overall streams for those 2 songs. It's an amazing playlist, and it's incredibly powerful, and it adds new listeners and new super fans over time to my entire catalog because of its discoverability. Now, the best way to maximize Discover Weekly chances for an artist or for a song, in my experience, are A, get a good Release Radar push. That's why I said it's the springboard to everything else. If you can get a song to go off on Release Radar, you just kind of springboard forward from 20% all the way up to 30% relatively quickly. And it's just a lot easier to get there faster. But if you don't pull that off, all is not lost. What I like to do is look at the top 5 songs for an artist on Spotify, and I generally start at the top of the list with the number 1 song on their profile, and I send traffic to the artist's profile so that when they land, they have that big green play button in their face, they have a follow button, and they can listen to the top songs and just go through their entire catalog. Generally, what's going to happen is they're going to start with the first song on the list, which means they're going to build in more streams for that song, more saves for that song, and it's going to drive that popularity score up. If you go look at your own catalog on the Artist X-Ray, you'll see that it's got the top 10 songs in your catalog, and the number 1 song is the one with the highest popularity score. What I like to do is just lean into the winners and find the one that I can get to Discover Weekly fastest and first. If I can get 1, 2, or 3 of the top 5 songs on Discover Weekly for an artist it lifts the entire catalog super fast compared to if you don't have anything on there. Sending traffic to the profile, getting people to listen, follow, and save the track. That's the fastest way to get there. All right, so I hope this has given you a little bit of insight into how these 3 top algorithmic playlists work on Spotify. Hopefully you'll have a bit of success in getting on one or all of them. So if you have had success or you have a strategy that you think works, let us know in the comments and give this video a like too. I'm told it helps the algorithm. We'll use that word again. Why not? And if you did enjoy this video and you want to go deeper with topics just like this every single week, then I hope you'll subscribe to my newsletter, The One Thing. Every Tuesday, I send out one thing that I am either thinking about or testing to succeed as an independent artist. So if you do want to subscribe to that, I'll leave a link to do so in the description of this video. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.